So this week we are going to continue with looking at light and shadow, but this time on man-made subjects, and we'll see if we see a bit of a difference in how the shading works. We're still exploring, really studying the darks and lights. So I did a sketch of our mailboxes outside. This is the neighbors and ours, and took photos of them and was working from photos. This is my preliminary drawing with lots of sketching and gesture drawing and using the ruler to get the verticals vertical. And it's 2-point perspective, so they're going off in 2 different directions. And it helps to have a straight edge for a man-made subject that has right angles and parallel lines. So I transferred that. This is my drawing now. Once you use the graphite paper, it pretty much spreads a lot of graphite everywhere. So it's a good thing to go in with a kneaded eraser and do a lot of lifting. In fact, lift some of the drawing itself so it's not quite as strong, and you won't see the pencil showing through on your painting. So through the years, I've taken lots of pictures of our mailbox. This is our bank when we had mulch on it, and then the ice plant, and different types of lighting. As you can see on this one, the sunlight's coming from the east in the morning and hitting this, and then making this a little darker. Now there's a couple of types of shadows we want to look at on man-made subjects. We have the rounded form where the face is going gradually like a cylinder. So this is not a hard edge shadow. It's a gradual transition. It may seem a little bit like it's a hard edge, but it's very soft. And then you have, once it turns a corner and you have a flat face, then that whole face will be one value. And this will be a gradual transition of values. So I decided to use this one where the bougainvillea are blooming to give it a little color here. And I played around with having the flags up, so I decided to use the one where this flag was up. And it's casting some shadows. The sunlight's slightly different in both of these. You can see it's a little bit more behind, and in this one it's facing a little bit more, so it's giving it a different cast shadow on the little handle that opens the mailbox. Okay, so if you look at this pole here, and it probably shows it better on this one, the sunlight's hitting here, and then it turns a corner and you have a very hard edge, and this is all a different value. So you want to look at the difference in the values, and if you have one of these little value finders, that's great. But even if it's a colored picture, you should be able to determine. It's easier on the mailbox, so I can say, well, that's the lightest light right here. And let's go to this one. If you squint your eyes, you can kind of dissolve the color. So this is, let's call this a number 1. And then we start to say, well, what is it when it turns the corner on the dark side and still not dark enough? And this is maybe it right here. So we go from 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. We have 6 values different, and going from the light side to the dark side. So let's kind of look at this one here. Since this is a brown local color, it's going to be darker. And I'm squinting my eyes, and I'm thinking that's getting pretty close. That might be a little dark here. I'm think this one, if I squint my eyes, or even this, if I squint my eyes, this kind of disappears into it. So let's call this a 7, or even maybe a 6. And then I go over here to this dark side, and this is all the way to a 10. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4 values difference on that. So watch for that. You don't want to lose sight of what it is we're trying to accomplish, is the idea of the sunlight hitting it. Okay, so I'm going to use this. I've drawn it all out. Now I'm going to start by painting the gray on the mailboxes. And as always, you guys know me, I'm going to mix my gray. I'm not going to use like a Payne's gray or anything like that. So I'm going to use a blue and then a complementary color, or else a burnt sienna with it. So I've got some cobalt blue, and my paints are nice and moist. I sprayed them. I've got fairly clean, fairly fresh colors. And here's an ultramarine blue. And I always like using burnt sienna. Let me get my menu here. I always forget what these are. So this is burnt sienna right here. This is a nice color. It's called light red. It's a little bit more of an orangey brown. So we've got that orange, and we can actually even get some Scarlet Lake right here. It's probably a little too orange. Okay, so I have my test paper here, and I'm going to try mixing a little bit of orange in with this until I get something that looks like a nice colorful gray. A gray is a cool mud and brown is a warm mud. So you go a little heavier. Of the three primary colors, two of them are warm, red and yellow, and only one is cool, which is blue. So you're going to add a little heavier on the blue. And I like that. So then I have to work on value. How much pigment and how much water do I have here? I want to make it fairly strong on the dark side. Remember, it's going to be what, 6 values darker. So I got to get my brush really loaded. And I can dip in different colors too to create different values. So I'm going to go real carefully on this edge here. And then I can define this better later. Actually, I'm going to use a bigger brush. Gotta work fast. Since I'm going to do a graded wash, I don't want it to dry. And I'm going to hope this is dark enough. And you think, wow, this is a white mailbox here. Why am I going so dark? But remember, it's in shadow. And when I used to paint portraits and I talk to people about skin tones, if you have somebody with a really dark skin tone, you're still going to get, if they're in light, you're still going to get a lot of light on parts of their face. And if you have somebody with a white skin tone, I'm just going to go over that, then they can go almost as dark as somebody with really dark skin on their shadow side. So now I'm starting to get that graded wash. We've done this before with mountains. So I'm moving up a little bit into, got to be careful not to get this. Oh, this is going to be red, so I have to be careful about this. All the way up to, I'm going to make this be the white of the paper. Oh, I got a few little blooms there. So what I'm going to do is go back down now with a damp brush and kind of smooth it out and then go back up again. Because of, It probably would have been easier if I'd have masked that out right there. But I decided to go around it. So I'm gonna soften that edge, soften that edge. So I've got a fairly good gradation. And I would do the same thing on the other side. Okay, so I can go ahead and give a value to this center part, but it's just almost just going to be dirty water. It's really, really pale. So I've dipped my brush in the water and just grabbed maybe a tiny bit of paint on here. And I can just go over that and do layers later. I'm going to leave this edge right here white. I made a little bit of a mess here, so I might have to lift that later. Okay, now let's try the wood. So I need to do the same thing with that wood, and I'll let this dry a little bit, and then I'll do some of the foliage for you. I'm going to leave this one alone and then finish it later, but for the purpose of this demo, I'll just leave it alone. Okay, so I'll use some burnt sienna. Let's use a little bit of Scarlet Lake and some New Gamboge and a little bit of blue in there to make it go a little more brown. And remember, we were going to have it pretty light on the, so I'm going to add a little bit more water. On the sunny side, it's going to be pretty light, maybe even a little more warm. I'm using a flat brush. And remember, things dry lighter. When you think it's really dark and then you realize later when it dries. And things are relative too. This looks pretty dark right now, but as soon as I get this value on here, that's going to look light. And once I get some dark ground around it, it's going to look even lighter. Now this is a 2x4 that's facing over, that's vertical. It's facing toward the sun, so it's holding up the, it's facing flat, and it's holding up the mailboxes. We've lived in this house so long. We moved here in 1979. Our daughter Amy was just almost 2. And the people that lived across the street that have that mailbox, it was an older couple, and they'd lived here since their kids, who were our age, were born, or they're maybe a little older. And so they were like the old people of the neighborhood. Now we're the old people. And their grandson ended up getting the house. So it's still a McKinley. Okay, I kind of like that almost complementary color. So I'm going to dry this just a bit so I can put the dark value next to it without making it run. Well, the nice thing about shadows is you can glaze over them. So if I want to go dark on this little cast shadow or this cast shadow here, you know, I'm not sure whether I'm going to make it go like that or like this, but you can always do that later. So I'm going to mix my darker value, maybe put a little more ultramarine blue, a little more pigment in there, a little more burnt sienna, and go fairly black, fairly dark, like a dark, dark brown. I just used a little bit of Quin burnt scarlet right here. So that's nice and dark. Add a little bit of burnt sienna on there. So I always say use the biggest brush possible and do it in as few of strokes as possible. We've got some weird angles here, so I have to kind of play with this. Plus I'm a little awkwardly situated for a demo because I've got a tripod pushing up against me. But you know, try and do the best you can to. So there's turning the corner. And if you notice right here, this side of the little top of the post is going to be in shadow too. It's the same color, so the local color is the same, but the cast shadow gives it a darker value. I mean, the sunlight and shadow gives it a dark value. This is called the form shadow. And then this would be a cast shadow. So the form shadow is what is on the surface of the actual object, and then a cast shadow can be on the object too, but it's being cast by something else. So hopefully we're seeing it turn the corner. And because this is wood, I can go in with a fan brush later and create some shadows or some texture. I think because this is not getting much sun underneath here, I'm going to go ahead and make this be darker back here, even though that's an upright also. And just for sake of expediency, I'm leaving just a tiny bit of white between these faces so that I don't need to blow dry everything here right now. I can fill it in later. But watch your little thicknesses. Man-made structures have thicknesses of whatever material they're made out of. You're going to get the thickness of this little metal thing right there. So we'll do that in just a second. And the thickness of the flag. And this is still a little wet, so I have to be careful here. But I'm gonna give this a light gray, and then I think I'll leave that white. Gotta leave some of the white of the paper showing, which is kind of nice. Okay, the front face of this is got a little bit of a light gray right here, but it's shiny, so I'm going to leave some white right there. And then as it turns the corner, it's going to have a darker little thickness right here. So let me give this, I'm going to have to dry this. No, let me do this first. And I'm going to get in and make a pretty darn dark blackish color for this edge. And that's going up. So as soon as I get that third dimension on there, it kind of pops it out a little bit. So we're going to get now some darks right here. And kind of clean up this edge here. And we have a bit of a cast shadow. Try not to put my arm in this. And again, that gives it that thickness. Since I wanted to leave that edge white, this didn't get very dark. So what I'm going to do is put a gray right there and then soften it away. So it's reading whiter next to it now without really so it's emphasizing that white edge a little bit. And then I think I'm going to have to go darker because this is extending out past that, so it really is darker down there. And even though it's facing the sun, it's in darkness, so I'm going to have to go much darker here. As soon as you put something dark next to something else, it makes that first thing lighter. So getting a little sunlight and shadow here. I'm gonna have to lift that. With man-made subjects and all these straight edges, you have to be a little bit more precise. I'm going to blow dry and then get this red in here and then put a little bit of the green background in so you can kind of see how that's going to help pop things out. I still think this is too light. There, I think that helps. Okay, I need to clear off a little spot here for some bright red and mixing some green. Actually, I'll just clean my whole palette because I've got red and green coming up. Okay, so get my cleaner water. And I am right-handed, so everything, my palette, my test paper, my sponge, and my water are all on the right side. So I'm not dripping across. I'm going to use a little permanent rose, and when it's popping up here, it's a lot in sunlight, so I'm going to use a little Scarlet Lake too. And the same with the bougainvillea, they're going to have an echo of that color too. One thing I do have to do is go back in and darken that little box that the flag is coming out of. I probably should have done that first, but I'll do it later. Now, since this one's up in the air, I'm gonna pretend it's getting a little more sun and maybe go a little bit more into an orange. Add a little bit more yellow. That red, I think, is really going to make it pop, and then the red bougainvillea, I think, will really help it out. So it's not, everything's not just a dead gray. I did have this drawn in, but I've lost it. I need to make sure this is following the same angle as that 2-point perspective. So it's going up at an angle also. There. Okay, so if I dry this, because I'm going to make sure this is really dry before I go in. I think I'm going to wet this background. And this is a hedge this is outside on our bank, and this hedge sort of surrounds the side yard there. So I think I want to include a little bit of that indication of this dark line here. And so I'm going to wet this and put lots of sparkly greens in there, maybe a little salt, and maybe do some wet into wet bougainvillea, and maybe a little spattering. So here goes nothing. I think I'll change my water. And get some fresh water so it won't influence the color that I'm going to put down. Now the reason I want to show you this, I know it's not really part of the mailbox, but this is where you're going to see the whites pop out. When you get this background in there, it's going to accentuate the light edge of the top. So I want to go right up to the white without. And since this is darker, I can wet all the way up and then put in the darker area later. And it's going to accentuate this white side of the topping of the pole there and the top of the McKinley's mailbox. And I think I can get away with only doing part of this right now because it's kind of broken up, and not worry about doing the whole thing right now. But I am going to wet everything so I don't have a hard edge, at least on this right side. Still looks like I had a lot of graphite still on here from that graphite paper. Be real careful that my water doesn't touch any place that's going to be wet, white. It's going to stay white. Okay, and I may have to re-wet that, but it's kind of soaking in now. So I'm going to use some. This is cerulean blue. I've got manganese here. I'm going in with more of the turquoisey blues at first, and peacock blue, and then I've got some ultramarine here. And let's get in with the lemon yellow. And new gamboge. Oops. Yellow has to be pretty clean to stay yellow. Okay. can get a little brown in there too. And I do have some sap green here. This got a little bit too much water in a puddle here, so I'm going to lift some of that. If I don't go right up to the edge, it's not going to define the object. Remember, this is the back end right here of the other mailbox, so I can fill that in later, but I got to be real careful right here. And then I've got to kind of keep in mind where my focal point is. It's the really the red flag in the mailbox. That's what I'm hoping. Now if I go really dark on this light side, I'm gonna have to do this here. Then that will make this pop out a little bit more. I think it'd be fun to have just a little bit of bright yellow, lemon yellow going on somewhere here. Just for the entertainment factor. Let me use a little bit of salt here. And as this dries, I can go in and make the bougainvillea a little more distinct and do some negative painting. But really, it's not about bougainvillea. It's not about the leaves and the plants. You know, we're just indicating that. And this will, we can define a little bit more of them by painting around them. But anyway, I hope that that helps you to see how this is now in sunlight. So I'll show you in class as I work on it a little bit more, but One other thing that you can do to show that texture is, this is just water, and especially if it gets to be that magic moment, you can spray a little water on there, and that's the texture of leaves and so on in the background. And I would definitely want to tighten up on all these little edges. Okay, and I will see you in class and have fun with this.